Thank you very much, Professor Holmes, Diana, for that beautiful, generous introduction. It's quite amazing. It's a great honour for me, a great pleasure to be here, to have been invited to be with you. I'm going to talk to you about Chéri, the book I've been working on, which I've just finished for Oxford University Press. It's in a rereading series. So the idea is you take a favourite writer, reread some of the texts, and write a book about your reading. And in my case, there's sometimes a gap of 50 years between first reading a novel by Colette and coming back to it. I found that I concentrated on the image of the mother in Colette, which is complicated, of course. And I thought I'd like to talk to you about Chéri because the mother is there, I think, refracted in a very particular way. And then I really want questions and comments from you because that's what writing is. It's throwing out the rope, the feather, the fruit, and wanting a conversation. Chéri, published in 1920, is a short, compact novel set just before World War I. It explores the changing relationship and power play between Léa, a wealthy Parisian courtesan, and her boyfriend Gigolo, the eponymous Chéri, half her age, whom she keeps, cherishes, and finally discovers she loves. The blurb on the back of my Penguin copy, the 1930 translation by Roger Senhouse, calls it Colette's most famous and perhaps her finest book. That may well be objectively true, but I remember being disturbed by Chéri when I first read it, in my 20s. I retained an impression of a decadent confection, some kind of soft, sugary, pale pink meringue wrapped in pale pink tissue paper adorned with a pink satin bow. Rereading Chéri recently, I experienced it very differently. Colette once recommended that writers should look for a long time at what we like, and even longer at what we don't like. Prodded by her, I found that the novel raised topics that in my own writing I have regularly felt I have to explore, even if they also disturb me. For example, female rivalries, bad mothers. I changed my mind about Chéri. I discovered that the novel now spoke to me in ways it hadn't done before. Ostensibly a tragicomedy of brittle manners, it's also, I decided, an exploration of the development of a self. Now I notice that language, both spoken and descriptive, formed not only the novel's materiality, but also its subject. The novel describes a birth, a particular one, a young man's delayed eventual birth into adult language and the rules and regulations that language describes. The rules and regulations of the world that language describes and helps bring into being. Since the novel concerns a woman who's made an excellent living from selling her sexual skills, it opens appropriately in her luxurious bedroom in her big house in the Parisian suburbs. Morning, two lovers, one still languishing in bed, and the other posing in front of a mirror. Colette creates a voluptuous world of sensual experience, plunging us straight into it and then disconcerting us, just as sex can do. The narrative perspective zigzags engagingly, offering abrupt changes of perspective in the same way that a cubist painting does. Along with avoiding steady narrative authority, the novel will disclaim conventional moral judgments. So it seems. This opening scene has Chéri defying traditional masculine codes by decking himself with Léa's massive pearl necklace and claiming it suits him much better than her. The male gaze here is resolutely narcissistic, as Chéri preens himself in the mirror and demands admiration. The female gaze remains dispassionate, Léa watching her lover tear open his pyjama jacket, the better to reveal his chest, curved like a shield, and the pearls lying against it. All we see of Léa are her upraised arms, those arms that signify her holding and enfolding of Chéri, the core of the novel. The reader is pulled in, at first a welcome voyeur peeping at the bedroom, the bed, and then Léa's privileged confidante as she observes her young lover with wryly intelligent indulgence. The role reversal of the game they're playing with the pearl necklace alerts us to another to do with age. Whereas it might be considered normal in Western culture for an older man to take up with a younger woman, here we're watching an older woman take up with a boy. The drama is so powerful, the tension between Léa and Chéri so compelling, that it's easy to glide over Colette's polished sentences, to rush past what her words are actually doing and saying. Accordingly, rereading a second and third time, I slowed down and attended to the novel's language far more than formerly. Once I did this, I became aware of just how supple and muscular the prose is. The book feels physical and alive. Something is breathing under the surface of the text. No, I've put that clumsily, suggesting that text is hard, like a lid, keeping the subtext down. I want to say that the narrative, the novel's body, is like fertile earth after rain, full of life, stirring with unseen energies and currents of meaning. The images, such as the flesh-pink walls of the bedroom, the nipple-like pearls, are not decorative but integral, organic. They structure a secret story that is at the same time in plain view. They point to it. What is the explicit story about? Love and loss, I'd say. Anything else? Henri de Jouvenel, Colette's second husband, a journalist and politician, used to get impatient with Colette's concentration on these subjects, deeming them frivolous. He took for granted the traditional split between the outer world of high finance and chambers of deputies, seen as a crucially male domain, and the inner one of domesticity and relationships, accepted as lesser because connected to women. Colette crashes through this distinction. Her novel reveals the two worlds as interdependent. The sexual politics at play in the bedroom are intertwined with financial interests and calculation. An aging courtesan, her value as a commodity diminishing, simply switches from selling herself to trading in stocks and shares. A dull, timid young woman is worth marrying because she's rich. The amoral underworld props up the hypocritical high bourgeois one. Love and loss, then, yes. Experienced in what kind of landscape? The book's setting offers a clue to the secret story. Chapter 1 opens in Leah's bedroom, as I said above. The walls are rose pink. The sun pierces through the pink curtains, casting a rosy light on the interior of the room, rippling over the pale frills of bed linen and lace. Leah's gleaming iron and copper bed is like an open, iridescent oyster shell. Pink-fleshed Leah in her mature beauty, forming the pink pearl inside. The bed displays her, blue-eyed and smiling, long-legged and voluptuous. The intensity of the morning sunlight produces dramatic contrasts. Chéri prances in front of the curtains, a black silhouette, like a graceful devil against a blazing furnace. Then when he steps back towards the bed, he becomes all white again, from his silk pyjamas to his Moroccan slippers. The chapter brims with sensual details. We seem to be lolling blissfully on a billowy cloud. Bliss is maintained by servants. The maid who runs Chéri's bath picks up his clothes and fetches his breakfast of hot chocolate and buttery brioche. The butler who selects the wine to accompany the exquisite lunch provided by the chef. The footman who polishes the wine glasses. The chauffeur who runs Leah about town. They know their places in the hierarchy and stay there. Leah knows her place too, firmly fixed in the demi-monde. She has spent her life as a grande horizontale, subjugating her own desire in order to service men's sexual whims, and so earn an excellent living. Savings heaped up in the bank, she can now relax with her young lover. He and she also occupy fixed positions. She is the older one in command who spoils her kept boy with presents, and he's the doted-upon, passive recipient of her cherishing. Their mutual teasing as they pivot around each other does not upset the balance of their relationship, but keeps the top spinning. It's when Leah changes the rhythm, changes how she speaks, that the power dynamic shifts and things start to topple. The secret story propelling the novel is fired by the energy of myth. I think that in Chéri, Colette is creating her own version of the Christian myth of paradise and paradise lost. She was taught the Christian stories as a child, and this founding myth of the Christian religion seems to have stayed with her. It lends resonance and depth to her novel, giving it a strong shape. In particular, Colette uses it to explore mother-son tugs of war. At its beginning, light flooding into the pink bedroom, the novel evokes not just the start of a new day, but the very start of the world. Before the fall, everything in the Garden of Eden is harmonious. There is no painful division. Opposites are connected. Woman and man, darkness and light, hardness and softness, sound and silence, maturity and childhood, even heaven and hell. We've just seen Chéri imaged as a graceful devil, and later on Leah will name him her beautiful demon, her fallen angel. I haven't got a language to evoke this state of non-division because language divides things by naming them. Colette gains her effect by showing us, making the state of non-division visual, felt. On a deep level, we're in a pre-linguistic state, dandled inside a cocoon of simple being, of pleasure. A dream of infancy? The room holds the bed, holds Leah, holding Chéri. They embrace inside a shining iridescent bubble. Before it bursts, the narrator shows us its fragile beauty. Unity soon begins to break up. If I change my image and now see Leah's bed as a cocoon, I watch it crack open. Chéri is necessarily born from it. First into the flesh-pink room, and thence, once he's dressed in his smart day clothes, into the courtyard, the street. He's off to lunch with his mother Charlotte and her friends, and Leah, an old sparring partner of his mother's, will join them afterwards. The biblical myth shows Adam and Eve as existing in the beginning in a state of innocence, ignorance. They're named as man and woman, but sexual difference seems not to matter and doesn't lead to desire and sexual action. It's their disobedience, the fall, eating the forbidden apple of knowledge, that results in their becoming aware of their genitals and then feeling sexual desire. When Leah, relaxing opposite the dozing Charlotte sleeping off her lunch, reminisces about her early relationship with Chéri, she remembers that theirs was initially an affectionate, sexless relationship. On one occasion, when she badgered him about his dissipated teenage lifestyle, ruining his health, he responded disrespectfully, but his bad manners did not shock Leah. Too intimate a friend, a kind of godmother, out to spoil him, whom he addressed with a familiar tu. Leah followed up this advice session soon afterwards, she remembers, with an explicit invitation. Remarking how pale and thin Chéri looks, she mentions that she's going away to the Normandy countryside, to her place near Honfleur, and offers to take Chéri with her as a kind of convalescence for him. There'll be nothing to do but eat, drink, sleep. Good strawberries, fresh cream, tarts, little grilled chickens. Now there's a healthy diet. And no women. Chéri leans against Leah's shoulder and closes his eyes. No women. Great. Leah, you're a pal, aren't you? Yes? Right, let's be off. Women? I've had it with them. She draws him closer and rocks him affectionately. When he commands her to kiss him, she touches her lips to his forehead, but he knots his arms around her neck and pulls her down to him for a kiss on the mouth. No more paleness. When Leah kisses him back, she does so with such passion that they reel apart, drunk, deafened, breathless, trembling, as though they'd just been fighting. Chéri is reduced to a childlike babbling. He murmured words, soft cries, a whole loving animal chant in which she made out her name and, darling, come here, never leave you. Off they go to Normandy. The green, fertile countryside is presented in classic romantic terms as the epitome of wholesomeness, the opposite of the city with its decadence and ruinous temptations. Nature is bountiful like a generous mother. Leah feeds her protégé with good fresh food, watches him laze by the pond or dawdle along green alleyways. At night in their Eden, they sleep together, Chéri's head on Leah's breast or nuzzled into her shoulder. Colette throws in casually like an afterthought that occasionally on waking in the morning they have sex. Sex is part of the purity of this secluded rural world. Colette maps her own particular version of the Adam and Eve story onto the biblical one. She structures her narrative by simultaneously invoking Greek myth, the myth of Oedipus. She tells us an incest story. Judith Thurman has nodded to the incest theme of Chéri, I see from her biography of Colette, but I want to expand her mention and put the subject at the centre of my rereading. The incest is metaphorical, obviously. Chéri names Leah his godmother. A kind of auntie, she scolds him, caresses him, instructs him, worries about his health, teases him. He laps it all up as his due. She describes him to herself as her nursling, an image suggesting a child she has breastfed, now one she's bound to bring up properly. Once the two begin having sex, the incest goes on being metaphorical, of course, since Chéri is not Leah's son. But they do seem to me to be acting out a joint dream of incestuous love and desire, initially veiled by denial. Léa in Normandy can watch the half-naked Chéri having his boxing lesson, can itemize and admire his beautiful physical traits, can assure herself that she feels happy and maternal and bathed in tranquil virtue. At the same time, she tells herself she feels indifferent. At the same time, she is sleeping with him. She taps his cheek, his leg, his thigh, with the irreverent pleasure of a wet nurse. It is spoken language that will eventually threaten the Eden in which Léa dandles Chéri. At the beginning of their affair, he doesn't confide in her when they're in bed together, unlike her previous young lovers. He gave away nothing but his body and remained as mysterious as a courtesan. Tender, yes, if tenderness can infuse an involuntary cry, arms open then closed. But as soon as he spoke, his spitefulness returned, his determination to reveal nothing. Often at dawn after they've made love, she whispers to him, urging him to speak. But no avowal came from that arched mouth, and no words other than sulky or rapturous phrases. These phrases are punctuated by cries of nounoun, the name he had given her when he was small, and which nowadays he called out in the depths of his pleasure, like a cry for help. Nounoun makes me think of nounours, a teddy bear. In fact, it comes from nounou, a childish term derived from nourrice, a woman who breastfeeds a small child, her own or someone else's. In his sexual rapture in bed, Chéri becomes again an infant. In his stubborn postcoital silence, he remains one. He hangs on to the delicious, incestuous reunion with the mother figure. He wants to go on basking in its heady, taboo comfort, which is maintained by its speechlessness. When he and Léa return to Paris after their Normandy idyll, they part, returning to their respective homes. But the very next night, Chéri returns to Léa on silent, winged feet, undemonstrative, saying nothing. He was running towards her. They tumble into bed and make love. Chéri pretends to fall asleep in order to grit his teeth and close his eyes, prey to a furious attack of taciturnity. Léa accepts his silence happily. She decodes the trembling of his body, certain that it spells out anguish, gratitude, and love. If she's under an illusion, she sustains it cheerfully. She doesn't recognize it or investigate it. The relationship continues for 7 years, centered in the refuge that is Léa's all-embracing bed. The novel begins its acceleration towards possible disaster when Chéri tosses out his spoken version of certain realities. In chapter 1, while he larks about and then gets dressed, he casually informs Léa of the forthcoming marriage into which his mother has urged him, and mocks the maternal jostling on both sides over the marriage settlements. He admits his relish of his own inherited fortune and the money he has saved by being kept by Léa. She acts unconcerned, bats his news aside, berates him tenderly. In chapter 2, we leave the Garden of Eden and enter instead its shadow version, the park-like grounds of the vast suburban villa where Chéri's mother, Charlotte Pelou, a rich retired courtesan, holds sway over her court of toadies and hangers-on. Charlotte Pelou is the serpent who has tempted Chéri away from Léa in favour of attaching him to Edmé, a wealthy heiress, the shy, pretty daughter of yet another courtesan, Marie-Laure. Chéri will replace a relationship of which his mother jealously disapproves with one that is conventionally acceptable. If Léa plays the role of the good mother of the child's longing, meeting and fulfilling all his desires, Charlotte embodies the bad one who deprives the child of care. She has alternately ignored and adored her son, abandoning him to the kitchen company of housemaids and men servants, alternately forgetting to feed him and stuffing him with sweets, and packing him off to a prison-like boarding school while she absconds with a lover. Of course he prefers Léa as a mother figure. Who wouldn't? In the fallen patriarchal world, outside the heaven on earth of the incestuous boudoir, women survive as best they may. The Belle Époque idealized and fetishized exaggerated femininity, while at the same time affording it a perverse, demonic side and according women few actual freedoms. Female education was limited and female options constrained. Colette describes a society in which a woman only has value when deemed desirable to men. Accordingly, many women survive by selling themselves to those men, whether as prostitutes or wives. Colette makes it clear that she links the two. Once over 50, a woman becomes what Leah herself calls a monster, disguising her disgustingness behind a screen of card games, good wine, bridge scorecards, and knitting needles. All the trinkets required to stop her up a gaping hole. The hole refers to the lack of a male lover. It makes me think of a gaping vulva. Charlotte and Marie-Laure, and Leah too by implication, flounce and compete in a harem world, which has no room for loyalty, and certainly not for the sisterhood believed in and hoped for by feminists. The relationship between Charlotte and Leah is characterized by Charlotte's bitchy remarks. They had known each other for 25 years. Hostile intimacy of light women, whom one man enriches, then casts aside, and whom another man ruins. Bad-tempered friendship of rivals on the alert for the other's first wrinkle or white hair. Camaraderie of practical women, adept at playing the money game, but one of them a miser and the other a pleasure seeker. These bonds count. Again, Colette foregrounds her character's particular use of language as key to the drama. Leah can recognize and even relish Charlotte's needling because she can fight back by pretending not to understand it. Open warfare won't do. Better to ignore the aggression inherent in the subtle insults. Calm and humorous, she refuses to show hurt. Her skirmishes with Charlotte are comic on one level, as she matches bitchy digs with clever ripostes, and grim on another, revealing how she can't ever express how she feels. As a light woman, she has to take things lightly. She refuses to give her antagonist the satisfaction of seeing her darts hit home. Eve has no best friend. In the terms of the biblical myth, the serpent Charlotte, tempting Chéri with the acquisition of even more wealth, represented by the dowry that Edmé will bring with her, helps destroy Leah's Edenic existence. Edmé also recognizes Charlotte as an adversary, telling Chéri that the snake wriggling under the bedroom door is the truly dangerous creature. Chéri departs on his honeymoon with Edmé, and Leah retreats to the south of France, pretending to take her new lover with her, in order to fend off Charlotte's triumphant crowing over her loss. Once back in Paris, Chéri abandons his disappointing too-young wife, retreats into the dissipated lifestyle of his youth. He discovers that drink, drugs, and women for sale aren't actually what he wants. A wanderer seeking a refuge, he surveys the debauch from the sidelines. Then one evening, wandering sadly past Leah's house, he sees that the lights are on. She has returned. The lovers' reunion, Chéri bursting in on Leah late at night, is characterized at first by their habitual use of language. Leah scolds Chéri in her typical maternal fashion for arriving unannounced, and he sulks childishly. They spar in brief, play-acting sentences. Then Leah's unscrewing of the top of a scent bottle, the scent flooding Chéri, releases him into direct physical memory of pleasure, and he calls out to her twice, "Nounoun." This time, when she commands him 3 times to speak to her, he finally does so, crying out, "Darling Nounoun, darling Nounoun." He collapses against her. Seated, she let him slip to the floor and sprawl against her with tears, disordered words. "Nounoun, darling, I found you again. My Nounoun, oh, Nounoun, your shoulder, and then your scent, and your necklace. Oh, my Nounoun, oh, it's wonderful." Leah berates him lovingly, and he stops babbling, instead listening to her with his head on her breast, and begging for more if for one instant she halts her tender litany. Finally, she holds him at arm's length and asks him, "So you loved me?" Chéri lowers his eyes in childish embarrassment. "Yes, Nounoun." He has never made this declaration before, and Leah realizes that she's close to abandoning herself to the most terrible joy of her life. In return, a little later, she makes her own declaration. "I haven't got a lover. I love you." Putting her love into words, she unwittingly courts danger. For the moment they make love and fall into the abyss of simultaneous orgasm. Afterwards, they remained entangled, and no words troubled the long silence of their return to life. Chéri, preparing to fall asleep, murmurs in broken sentences his worries about what will happen the following day, and Leah soothes him tenderly. Don't worry, lie down and sleep. Isn't Nunun here? Don't think about anything. Sleep. While he does so, Leah decides that they must escape Paris for somewhere peaceful and remote. I'll do the thinking for both of us. Let him do the sleeping. She cradles him. A dream troubles but does not wake him. Tenderly, she calms him. She rocked him so that for a long time he might go on resembling that wicked nursling never born to her. The relationship can only survive as long as Leah combines the persona of mother and lover inside her flesh-pink, womb-like bedroom. For a while, musing overnight, Leah imagines she can win. However, her ecstatic fantasies of Chéri and herself openly becoming a couple, fleeing to the safe exile of the Riviera, mixing with tolerant, sophisticated compatriots who will accept their adulterous union, their age difference, are ruined next day by being converted into speech. Leah becomes a traditional Eve. It's all her fault. She brings about the fall by eating the forbidden fruit, dreaming the forbidden dream, uttering the forbidden words. She ignores the taboo, the godlike instruction Chéri didn't know he was going to uphold, forbidding incest to be witnessed and accepted in the outside world. Her losing her head and making her desire explicit is simultaneous with Chéri suddenly realizing that she's aging. An older woman lover is all very well, as long as she strives to hide her age with subtle makeup and flattering pale pink underwear. But one who carelessly reveals her wrinkles is repulsive. Clues to the forthcoming disaster pile up. First of all, on the morning following their reunion, Chéri wakes before Leah but feigns sleep so that he can watch her. No longer the softly accepting mother figure of dream, the sexy mother of enveloping night and scented darkness, she becomes simply a practical, organizing person examined in the bright, unforgiving light of day. She gets up briskly, consults a railway timetable, frowns in concentration. She pulls out a checkbook. It's all much too businesslike for Chéri. Now he notices disturbing signs. Not yet powdered, a thin twist of hair on her nape, with a double chin and a ravaged neck, she was offering herself imprudently to his invisible gaze. In the novel's opening chapter, as I noted above, Leah lies in bed in the morning and observes Chéri, his black silhouette against the radiant curtains veiling the sun. In this final chapter, with Chéri separating himself from Leah, the perspective and the roles are reversed. Chéri lies in bed and observes Leah's black silhouette as she bustles about, making her preparations for their departure. When she emerges into the light, she is not beautiful, as Chéri was in that early scene, but ugly. Over breakfast, Chéri, struggling with his appalled realization of his changed perception of Leah, can think of nothing to say, but decides he'll get away with it since Leah knows he's always taciturn at this time. Misreading his silence for contentment, Leah blows it. She throws aside all her habitual caution, giving herself over to the pleasure of her avowal, finally being able to express what she feels without fear. Chéri is her love, her great love, her only love. Dramatic monologue swiftly becomes grotesque comedy as she rushes on to consider the letter to his wife that will have to be written, the luggage he will need, the yacht she will buy for him, the financial settlement to be made on Edme. Grasping Leah's hand, Chéri notices its soft, flabby skin, its wrinkles. As he withdraws, she reaches for him, then faces reality. Courageously, she realizes this is the end. Chéri may have come back, she tells him, but he's found an old woman. Of course, therefore, she must let go of him. This prosaic admission, in the terms of a sexist culture, old women are repulsive and cannot be desires, masks the recognition of another cultural taboo: sons must not have sex with their mothers. Leah's recognition of cultural and moral reality marks the great shift in Chéri's use of language. Released from Leah's maternally, incestuously loving hold, Chéri abandons his former mutism and unleashes torrents of speech. He is born into language, into adult speech, which is ruled by the conventions of society. Whereas in bed he babbled, in Christeba's semiotic, the infant's poetic murmurings and cries to the mother, Now he enters the symbolic, the grown-up word formulations dictated by patriarchy, the grammar of the law of the father. When Leah cannot stop herself from a jealous, angry outburst at the thought of his returning to his wife, he tells her not to complain, to remain the chic type she's always been, the chic type he loved at the beginning. If we've got to end it, did you have to go and be like other women? He rushes on, telling her at great length how much he suffered during their separation when he was first married and ran away from his wife, how he could think of nothing and no one but Leah, how much he missed her, the most beautiful, the best of women. He has put Leah into a fixed, idealizing place in the rigidly organized grammar of his narrative. Now she belongs not in the eternal present, dancing outside time of incestuous mother-child love, but in the past tense of male-ordered power relations. She used to be his lover. Stuck on her pedestal like a sexlessly maternal Virgin Mary, Leah reacts with superb dignity, submitting to become merely a memory. She yields to the definition forced upon her. At the age when so many women have stopped living, I was for you the most beautiful, the finest of women, and you loved me. How I thank you, my darling. Simultaneously, she spells out her maternal loss. You are breaking away very late from me, my wicked nursling. I've carried you next to me for too long, and now you have a burden of your own to carry, a young wife, perhaps a child. She goes further, urging him to enjoy his youth, to find true passion with his wife. She loves you. It's her turn to tremble. She will suffer as a lover does, and not like a perverse mother. You will speak to her as a master, but not as a capricious gigolo. Quick, quick, be off. Leah, parroting the common sense rules of the culture, is trying to retain some dignity. The end of their liaison is marked by her objection. I can't read her subservience as ironically declared. I read it as accepted. Man is master of his wife in marriage. The mistress cannot be the equivalent of the master. The mistress is blotted out. Chéri has suddenly grown up and will act out the law of the father. What do I conclude? What has this rereading given me? Not simply the secret or not so secret incest narrative I've just sketched, but also a string of metaphors. The Garden of Eden is the maternal body, is the one the son longs for, is the dream of incest, is the fall, is the impossible story that must be cut short. The novel reinscribes the Christian myth, paradise is necessarily lost. It reinscribes the Oedipal myth, don't love your mother too much. Tears after bedtime will follow. Leah's tears, not Chéri's. The novel closes with him fleeing into the street into the springtime, like a man escaping from prison. The novel, for all it engages me with its exquisite writing, its sensuality and irony, makes me feel sad too. Under its charm, humour and precise observation lies tragedy. Leah's loss of value, her loss of beauty and desirability in a world where patriarchal strictures define these terms. Part of the story's poignant force derives from Leah's attempting to ignore, if not defy, the rules defining proper femininity. In so doing, she exposes them in all their constraining cruelty. On the level of social morality, an equal part of the story's force lies in the novel's return to the status quo. Sexual order is restored, and the rules against incest reinstated. Temptation, having been tasted and enjoyed, can be renounced. The carnival's over, and normal life is resumed. This normal life is founded on acceptance of economic and sexual inequality. On one level, Colette could be seen as a brave realist. In Leah's milieu, female relationships are structured by distrust and hostility. Women's degraded place in this culture, their gaining value only via male favour, makes them viciously competitive with one another. They exchange spiteful digs disguised as compliments. They measure each other up like animals at a trade fair, judge each other as harshly as do the men buying them. Leah may coolly deflect Charlotte's flung barbs, joining in her game with amused detachment, while privately noting her rival's vanished youth and beauty. But towards the bashful, sweetly pretty Edmé and her resplendently beautiful mother, Marie-Laure, she is merciless, concluding to herself that while Ednée is a perfect foil to Marie-Laure, the latter must hate her nonetheless. The coldness and brutality of Léa's attitude, her assumption that mothers necessarily hate and envy their daughters, contrasts sharply with her adoration of her young male lover. She can't admire and enjoy a young woman's beauty and freshness, which women in my world can do. She feels it as a threat, which of course in her world it is. How different this is to the portrait Colette offers in La Maison de Claudine of the mother-daughter relationship. In the paradise that Colette describes herself inhabiting with Sido, the mother names her young daughter her jeweled golden treasure, a safe metaphor, since they're not caught up in the cruel cash nexus of being commodities sold on the open market. Mother and daughter can go on tenderly cherishing each other with openly expressed affection, pet names. Certainly that image of the mother-daughter relationship can be read as idealistic, over-simple, polished up. In Chéri, Colette offers a glimpse of mother-daughter hatred, imaged as a rift that cannot be mended. I wonder whether my perceiving this unhealable wound informed my initial hostility to the novel back in my 20s. Much as I battled with my own mother, I also simultaneously yearned of her love and to be reconciled with her. Perhaps I just couldn't bear the coldness of Léa's social world, in which such reconciliation could not happen. The title of my talk invokes Donald Winnicott's idea that a mother doesn't have to be perfect. She just needs to be good enough. So what's a bad enough mother? Is she the selfish Charlotte, driving her neglected son into Léa's arms? Is she Léa, spoiling and indulging him? Perhaps bad enough simply means human enough to want to break the rules. I don't know. I keep changing my mind. I need to read Chéri again. I need to move beyond the binaries of good and bad. Colette's novels leapfrog over conventional morality. For this ex-Catholic heretic, that's part of their genius. Thank you. Now you've got to talk.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michèle. I thought that was wonderful. I've always thought, though I've never managed to analyse it or express it so beautifully, that Chéri, despite the way it was read as as a kind of fluffy novel by so many, is a profoundly serious novel on so many levels, and I thought that captured it perfectly.
Thank you.
Does anybody have a question for Michèle on Colette? That I can see somebody up there.
Thank you so much. A really, really beautiful paper. I just thoroughly enjoyed listening to you talk, and so evocative and really drew me into the narrative, so I really appreciate that. I've been working for a number of years on a medical historian looking at medical concepts of women's ageing and engaging with some literary texts, including Colette's. So I'm really fascinated how a lot of the women writers in France who seemed quite, in some senses, fascinated by women's ageing, how the differentiation between how they think about it in their youth, and Colette is someone who was really quite concerned with women's ageing all her life, as was Simone de Beauvoir, and how they end up talking about their ageing when they themselves understand themselves to be ageing. If you have any thoughts about that.
I think Colette does play some games with us and does play some tricks on us. For example, in La Naissance du Jour, she tells us a story of an older woman who is a Colette avatar with whom a young man falls madly in love. And I think Colette makes herself in that novel about 50, which is apparently the terrible age at which you die erotically. And it's a very beautiful novel about renunciation, and she gives up the young man, and they have a nuit blanche, not of making love, but of speaking. But the game she's playing there, as many critics have pointed out, is that at that very moment she was passionately engaged with Maurice Goudecquier, her junior by, is it 30 years, something like that, having a marvellous, rapturous time in bed, writing frank letters to Marguerite Moreno and her friends, but in the novel Renunciation. So huge pinches of salt, I think, have to be thrown about. But I think there's no doubt that as some of the French writers who've contributed introductions to Colette's novels keep saying, oh, it's very, very strange to hear an older woman talking so rapturously about erotic love. I mean, she was writing in a culture that devalued old women and denied eroticism after a certain age. And I think all she can do is take the rules of that game and turn them into a kind of dance. I think that's her method very often, is to kind of dance a tango with the problem, not to deny it and not to fight it openly. And I think probably tango is very good for older women's physical health. And so I recommend it strongly. It's also an erotic dance.
May I just add on sorry, no, I won't, no, this one.
Thank you for that illuminating lecture. I'm wondering whether you could extend your analysis to incorporate the sequel to Chéri, La Fin de Chéri, which is a much darker book in many ways, and where there's a lot of gender reversal, and where Chéri seems to be abandoned by everyone after having spurned Léa.
Well, in La Fin de Chéri, we see Chéri come back from having fought in the First World War, and he re-encounters Léa. And it's only a couple of years, actually, if you look at the chronology of the novels, but she has suddenly turned into this monster she herself has adduced. And she's stout, sitting with her legs apart, roaring with laughter, behaving disgracefully, looking too masculine, a real monster. But of course, the tragedy of Chéri is that he cannot re-enter his lost paradise. And that, I think, is what the book is circling around, that he has no place in the Parisian culture to which he returns. He's disabused of any idealism he had about masculine heroism. He's no longer terribly interested in money. His marriage is dull and kind of hypocritical. So it's a much more straightforward, tragic novel, I think. And I don't suppose we should say what the ending is, because people here might need to go away and read it, maybe for the first time.
I think the ending is in the title, so I don't think we're giving away anything too much.
I couldn't hear what you said.
I think the ending is in the title, so we're not giving away anything.
But let's not give away the method. They are twin novels. I think, having read Chéri, you need to read La Fin de Chéri. Yes. Here's one.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you, so you said that you read Chéri differently when you were younger and now. And so is it also that you are now closer to Léa to a certain sense? Because that's how I feel. That I had the same experience, and I now feel much closer to what Léa thinks and how she is. Does that happen to you as well?
Do you know, I didn't really think about that at all, because I'm so conscious of her role in Chéri as a very, very beautiful woman, making her living selling sex and being incredibly wealthy with all these servants flying around, that it's quite hard for me to identify with her.
Okay, I wasn't identifying with that either.
You know, I don't charge for sex, and And I'm not, I don't have a wonderful Parisian villa like she does, and I'm only teasing you. I think I was interested in this idea of the older woman losing her allure. And so, yes, of course, in that sense, I'm much older than Leia. She's only 50 in Chéri, and I'm 74. So I think, in a way, I'm looking kind of back at Leia, poised on that cusp of apparently about to die erotically and be abandoned forever. But of course, there's the Colette jouissance, which is, ha-ha, but who knows what will happen. So my answer to your question can only be yes and no. But that's all right, isn't it?
All right, thank you. Thank you for teasing me as well.
Can I just add that someone used the word fluff? I think you did. And I feel one of the reasons perhaps Colette hasn't had her view in England is although some of the novels got translated back in the 20s and 30s by people like Roger Senhouse. And I forgot to say I was reading my own translations in that. But she's been presented very often to British readers as kind of naughty, frou-frou, legs in the air, comédienne. And it's a misreading of her because she certainly worked in music hall and she was an actor and appeared in her own plays, in her own stage versions of Chéri, for example. But she was a very serious writer. She was a modernist. She reinvented the French novel. That's my view of her. That's what I'm arguing in my book. She's a profoundly important French writer. And I think in Britain, we have misunderstood her, and I think now with these great anniversaries happening, she's been given her due. And of course, Diana has written her beautiful book on her, which if you haven't read, you must immediately read. It is a command.
Going back to the question from up there, I was just going to ask you, Michèle, that, or at least to suggest that in La Naissance du Jour, apart from the tango, that there is also a huge emphasis on precisely what doesn't come into the Leia character, or perhaps only marginally. That is, all the rest of life, you know, as she puts it, tout le reste est gai, varié et nombreux, that once you get out of the complete focus on women's situation in a patriarchal society where erotic capital dies at the age of 50 and so on, that there is all the rest of life to contemplate. And a lot of her work does also, I think, represent that quite powerfully, and that's unusual too.
I completely agree with you, because I think one of the beauties of La Naissance du Jour is its celebration of sensual everydayness. We start with Colette waking up and looking at the dawn. She's in Provence in her little house in Saint-Tropez, and we get these beautiful vignettes of that landscape and the dawn and the sea, and we get her mind racing about. And the reason it's such a fantastic, inventive, original modernist novel is that it's actually sparked off by letters from Sido, which are quoted. It's got Sido's ghost floating through it. Sido thinking that an ever-flowering cactus is the same as a young man with an erection. And Colette has to say, right, oh, Sido, you got there before me. I mean, it's so mixing of genre and of register and of tone, but it's full of all these other things in life, so that if you have a sensual soul, Colette shows us how to enjoy the earthly paradise that we live in. You could call her, in a sense, interested in ecology, I think. There's an awful lot about planting trees and gardening and cherishing animals and cherishing the earth, loving the earth. And it's partly a greedy love, wanting to experience everything. And again, it's balanced by this idea of stepping back and looking, but not spoiling things by grabbing them or eating everything or wanting too many lovers all at once. So it's a profound and marvelous novel, I agree with you, about enjoyment and pleasure and sort of worldly sacraments, perhaps you could call those. Every time you make a really wonderful lunch for your good friends, that's the Holy Communion. That's, I think, Colette as the sort of priestess of the body and pleasure. And for me, as a Catholic brought up in such awful denial and repression and self-hatred and sensuality is bad, you read La Naissance du Jour and you just think, right, got it. Open that bottle of vin rosé and get on with it. And of course it's about reading as well, it's about memory. So pleasure extends over so much, doesn't it? Yes.
Absolutely. And perhaps as a final point, I thought the other thing that came through your analysis of Chéri was the element which also tends to get overlooked of a kind of realism in Colette, that you talked about the way the intimate encounters in the bedroom are absolutely inseparable from a very real socio-economic reality beyond, that those two worlds are no longer public out there, over there, private in here, but it's absolutely apparent what the kind of underpinning is that determines the tragedy, really, of Chéri. You know.
And partly that's just done through windows and doorways. When people look out, Leia looks out of the window and she sees Chéri being chatted up by some serving maids, or she sees him running away, escaping from her. And then when she approaches Charlotte's villa via that dreadful garden, we move from a public domain into a more private domain, but where the buying and selling of female flesh has been enacted. Yes. She's a profound and wonderful writer. I hope anyone here who hasn't yet read a lot of her books will give her a whirl, because she'll give you a whirl.
Absolutely. We should probably draw to a close there. So I'd like to thank you once again, Michèle, for an absolutely wonderful opening plenary on Colette, and do read her.